I think I didn't do anything wrong, just told a funny story at our wedding, that's all. So I was shocked when the next thing I saw was a lawyer's envelope on the kitchen table. My husband never even looked at me. All of this, just because I made one joke? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The reception hall buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses as I stood at the head table, microphone in hand. 200 guests filled the elegant ballroom, their faces turned toward me expectantly. This was my moment, my chance to be the center of attention on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice carrying across the room with practiced confidence, I want to tell you all about my wonderful husband, Graham. Graham shifted uncomfortably beside me, his hand reaching for his water glass. I could see the nervous smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He'd always been the quiet type, preferring to stay in the background while I commanded attention. That's what I loved about him. He made me feel like the star. Graham and I have been together for 8 years now, I continued, warming to my audience. And let me tell you, he's got so many wonderful qualities. He's kind, he's gentle, he's patient. I paused for dramatic effect, noticing how the crowd leaned in slightly. And he's got the cutest little... I made a pinching gesture with my thumb and forefinger. Everything. A ripple of nervous laughter went through the crowd. I saw my mother Helen grinning broadly from the front table, while my sister Priscilla covered her mouth, giggling, but Graham's face had gone pale beside me. "Oh, don't worry," I said, waving my hand dismissively at Graham. "He makes up for it in other ways, like he does all the dishes, and he never complains when I rearrange the furniture for the 3rd time in a month." More laughter, but I noticed it sounded forced now. And the best part is, he never takes up too much space in bed. I was on a roll now, feeding off the energy of the crowd. Some people were laughing, others looked uncomfortable, but all eyes were on me. That's all I wanted. To be seen, to be memorable. Graham is like a pocket-sized husband, I continued, completely absorbed in my performance. Compact, efficient, and easy to handle. What more could a girl ask for? Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Graham's mother Sylvia looking mortified. Her husband Paul was trying to calm her with gentle touches on her arm, but her face was flushed with embarrassment. Graham's father looked like he wanted to disappear under the table, but I was having too much fun to stop now. "I remember our first time together," I said, lowering my voice conspiratorially. I thought, well, this won't take long. And I was right. The laughter was definitely uncomfortable now, but I pressed on. "But you know what they say. It's not the size of the boat, it's the motion of the ocean. Although in Graham's case, we're talking more like a kiddie pool." That's when I felt it. The subtle movement beside me. Graham's hand had moved under the table, and when I glanced down, I saw him quietly sliding his wedding ring off his finger. The gold band caught the light for just a moment before he slipped it into his pocket. The gesture was so small, so quiet, that I almost missed it. But something cold settled in my stomach as I watched him do it. His face remained neutral, that same polite smile fixed in place, but his eyes had gone completely flat. I stumbled through the rest of my toast, suddenly feeling less confident. The laughter died down, and people began looking away, focusing on their drinks or their dinner plates. When I finally raised my glass for the traditional cheer, the response was lukewarm at best. As I sat back down, Graham leaned over to me. For a moment, I thought he might whisper something sweet. Maybe tell me he was just adjusting his ring because his hands were sweaty. Instead, he said in a voice so quiet only I could hear, "That was quite a performance, Evadne." The way he said my name sent another chill through me. There was something different in his tone, something I'd never heard before. But I pushed the feeling aside. He was just being sensitive, like always. It was a wedding. People were supposed to laugh and have fun. "Oh, come on," I whispered back, forcing a bright smile. Everyone loved it. "You're being too serious." Graham didn't respond. He just turned back to his plate and began cutting his chicken with mechanical precision. For the rest of the reception, he played the part of the happy groom perfectly, smiling for photos, dancing when expected, thanking guests for coming, but I noticed he never put his ring back on. When people came up to congratulate us, Graham was polite and gracious. But when Mrs. Henderson from down the street made a comment about my hilarious speech, I saw something flicker across his face, just for a second, before he excused himself to get another drink. My sister Priscilla bounced over during the dancing, her cheeks flushed with champagne. "Oh my God, Evie. That speech was incredible. You had everyone in stitches. Graham's such a good sport about it." I glanced over at my husband, who was standing by the bar talking to his cousin. Yeah, I said, but something felt off. He's fine. He knows I was just having fun. Some guys would have been so embarrassed, Priscilla continued. But Graham just sat there smiling. He's either really secure or really patient. Or really angry, I thought, but I pushed that possibility away. This was my wedding day. I deserved to have fun, to be the center of attention. Graham would get over it. He always did. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the image of that ring sliding off his finger. It had been such a deliberate movement, so final somehow, and the way he'd said my name, like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. When we finally got home that night, Graham went straight to the bathroom to get ready for bed. I expected him to come out and talk about the day, maybe even laugh about my speech now that we were alone. Instead, he emerged in his pajamas, kissed me briefly on the forehead, and climbed into bed without a word. "Graham," I said, sitting at my vanity removing my makeup, "are you okay?" "I'm fine," he replied, his back to me. "Just tired." But he wasn't fine. I could feel it in the space between us, in the way he held his body rigid under the covers. Something had shifted during that toast. Something I couldn't quite name, but couldn't ignore either. As I lay in bed that night, still wearing my wedding dress because I'd been too tired to take it off properly, I stared at the ceiling and replayed the evening in my mind. Everyone had laughed. People had complimented my humor. I'd been entertaining and memorable, exactly what I'd wanted. So why did I feel like I'd lost something important? 3 months after the wedding, I was sitting in my cubicle at Morrison & Associates, staring at a spreadsheet that seemed to blur together. The administrative work was mind-numbing, but it paid the bills while Graham worked his way up at the engineering firm. Our life had settled into a routine that felt more like a rut. Graham left for work at 7:30 every morning with a quick kiss on my cheek. He came home at 6:15, asked about my day while loosening his tie, and we'd eat dinner while watching the news. Weekends were for grocery shopping, laundry, and visiting his parents. It was all so predictable, so boring. Rough day? I looked up to see Stephen Halloran leaning against my cubicle wall, coffee mug in hand. Stephen worked in accounts receivable, and over the past few weeks, we'd started chatting more during coffee breaks. He was divorced, confident, and had a way of making me feel interesting when I talked to him. "Just the usual excitement," I said, gesturing at my computer screen. "Invoicing and data entry, living the dream." Stephen laughed, and I liked the sound of it. It was different from Graham's quiet chuckles, more robust, more appreciative. "Want to grab a drink after work? There's a new place down the street that's supposed to have great happy hour specials." I should have said no. I was married, after all, but the thought of going home to another evening of routine felt suffocating. "Sure," I heard myself say. "That sounds nice." The bar was dimly lit with exposed brick walls and jazz music playing softly in the background. Stephen ordered us both gin and tonics, and for the first time in months, I felt sophisticated again, like the person I used to be before marriage and mortgages and mundane responsibilities. "So tell me about this husband of yours," Stephen said, settling back in his chair. "What's he like?" I took a sip of my drink, feeling the gin warm my throat. "Graham? He's—" I paused, trying to think of something interesting to say about my husband. "He's nice, steady, reliable." "Sounds thrilling," Stephen said with a grin. "He's just so predictable," I found myself saying. "Like I always know exactly what he's going to say or do. There's no excitement, no spontaneity. Sometimes I feel like I'm married to a very polite robot." Stephen nodded sympathetically. "That must be frustrating. You seem like someone who needs more stimulation than that." The way he said stimulation made my cheeks flush. "I used to be more exciting," I said. "Before we got married, I was the life of the party. I was fun and unpredictable. Now I feel like I'm just existing." "What changed?" Stephen asked, leaning forward slightly. "I don't know," I said, though even as I said it, I knew that wasn't entirely true. "Graham just has this way of making me feel like I'm too much, too loud, too outgoing, too everything. Like at our wedding, I gave this funny toast, and he acted like I'd committed some terrible crime." "What did you say?" I told Stephen about the wedding toast, expecting him to laugh and validate my side of the story. Instead, he raised an eyebrow. "You said all that in front of everyone?" "It was just a joke," I said quickly. Everyone laughed. Well, most people did. Graham was just being oversensitive. Stephen nodded slowly. "Some guys can't handle a woman with a sense of humor. They take everything so personally." That's exactly what I needed to hear. Stephen understood me in a way Graham never did. He appreciated my wit, my boldness. When I talked to him, I felt like myself again, not some watered-down version trying to fit into Graham's quiet world. Our after-work drinks became a regular thing. Stephen would text me during the day, asking how I was doing or making jokes about our boss. I found myself looking forward to his messages, checking my phone constantly for that little notification. "You seem happier lately," Graham observed one evening as we sat on the couch watching television. "Work going better?" "Yeah," I said, not looking away from the screen. "I've been making some new friends. It's nice to have people to talk to." Graham nodded and went back to his book. He didn't ask who these new friends were or what we talked about. His lack of curiosity frustrated me. A real husband would want to know about his wife's life, wouldn't he? Stephen, on the other hand, wanted to know everything. He asked about my childhood, my dreams, my frustrations. He listened when I complained about Graham's habits, how he always rinsed his dishes but never actually put them in the dishwasher, how he fell asleep watching TV every night, how he seemed more interested in his engineering journals than in me. "You deserve better than that," Stephen told me one evening as we sat in our usual corner booth. "You're vibrant and intelligent. You shouldn't have to dim your light for anyone." His hand covered mine on the table, and I didn't pull away. It felt nice to be touched with intention, with desire. Graham's touches had become perfunctory. Quick kisses, brief hugs, mechanical intimacy that felt more like obligation than passion. "I don't know what I was thinking when I married him," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I guess I thought stability was what I wanted. But I'm only 32. I'm too young to feel this old." "You're not old," Stephen said, his thumb tracing circles on my hand. "You're just married to someone who doesn't appreciate what he has." That night, I came home to find Graham asleep on the couch, his book open on his chest. I looked at him lying there, mouth slightly open, glasses askew, completely oblivious to my absence. He hadn't even texted to ask where I was. I gently shook him awake. "Come to bed, honey." Graham blinked up at me, disoriented. "What time is it?" "Almost 11. I was out with some coworkers." He nodded sleepily and followed me upstairs. As he got ready for bed, I studied his reflection in the bathroom mirror. When had he started looking so ordinary? His shoulders weren't as broad as Stephen's. His hair was thinning slightly at the crown. He moved through his nighttime routine with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. In bed, Graham reached for me automatically, but I turned away, claiming I was too tired. The truth was, I didn't want his touch anymore. It felt like settling, like accepting less than I deserved. 2 weeks later, Stephen kissed me in the parking garage after work. I knew I should have stopped it, should have pulled away and reminded him that I was married. Instead, I kissed him back, feeling alive for the first time in months. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he whispered against my ear. "We can't," I said, but my body was saying something entirely different. "I know," he replied, "but I can't stop thinking about you, about what it would be like if you were free." Free. The word echoed in my mind as I drove home that night. When had I started feeling trapped? When had my marriage become a cage instead of a partnership? Graham was in the kitchen when I arrived, stirring something on the stove. "I made your favorite," he said with a smile. "Chicken parmesan." I looked at him standing there in his work clothes, so pleased with his small gesture, and felt a wave of irritation. This was his idea of romance, making dinner and expecting gratitude for basic consideration. "Thanks," I said flatly, heading upstairs to change. "Evadne?" he called after me. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I replied, though nothing felt fine anymore. I was caught between two worlds, the safe, predictable life I'd chosen and the exciting possibility of something more. As I changed out of my work clothes, my phone buzzed with a text from Stephen. "Can't stop thinking about today. You're incredible." I stared at the message, my heart racing. Graham was downstairs making me dinner, being the dutiful husband he'd always been, but Stephen was offering me something Graham never could. Passion, excitement, the feeling of being truly desired. I deleted the text without responding, but the damage was already done. The line had been crossed, and I wasn't sure I wanted to go back. The family dinner was supposed to be a celebration of Graham's recent promotion to senior project engineer. His parents, Paul and Sylvia, had driven over from their house across town, and my mother, Helen, had come with my sister, Priscilla. 6-year-old Lila, Graham's niece who was visiting for the weekend, sat between her grandparents, coloring quietly in her activity book. I'd spent the afternoon preparing Graham's favorite meal, pot roast with all the fixings. Not because I particularly wanted to, but because I knew it would look good to his parents. Sylvia had always been critical of me, though she tried to hide it behind polite smiles and backhanded compliments. "Everything looks wonderful, dear," Sylvia said as we gathered around the dining room table, but I caught the way she examined the place settings, probably looking for something to critique. Evadne's always been a wonderful cook, my mother Helen chimed in, shooting a pointed look at Sylvia. Graham's lucky to have her. The tension between our mothers had been simmering for years. Helen thought Graham wasn't good enough for me, while Sylvia clearly believed her precious son had married beneath him. Usually Graham and his father Paul worked to keep things civil, but tonight felt different. Graham was quieter than usual as he carved the roast. He'd been distant for weeks now, ever since I'd started staying late at work more often. Not that he'd asked many questions about my extended hours. Sometimes I wondered if he even cared what I did with my time. "So, Graham," my mother said, accepting the plate he handed her, "Evadne tells me you got a promotion. That's nice, I suppose, though I still think you could do better at a larger firm." "The promotion comes with a significant salary increase," Paul said proudly, defending his son. Graham's always been methodical about building his career. "Methodical," I repeated, cutting into my meat with more force than necessary. That's definitely the word I'd use to describe Graham. Everything planned out, everything predictable. Graham glanced at me, a slight frown creasing his forehead. "I thought you appreciated stability." "Oh, I do," I said with a bright smile that didn't reach my eyes. "It's just so safe. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be married to someone with a little more ambition, someone who takes risks." Sylvia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Graham has always been responsible. That's an admirable quality in a husband." "Responsible, yes," I agreed. "But where's the passion? Where's the excitement? Sometimes I feel like I'm married to an accountant instead of an engineer." "There's nothing wrong with being practical," Paul said carefully. "Graham's built a good life for both of you." I laughed, and the sound came out sharper than I intended. "A good life? We have the most boring existence imaginable. Same routine every day, same conversations every night. Graham comes home, asks about my day in exactly the same tone, and then we watch the news while eating dinner. Rinse and repeat." Little Lila looked up from her coloring book, sensing the tension in the room. Graham noticed and immediately tried to change the subject. "Lila, show everyone what you've been working on." But I wasn't ready to let it go. The frustration I'd been feeling for months was bubbling to the surface, and having an audience somehow made it worse. "You know what the most exciting thing Graham did last week was?" He reorganized his tool shed. Alphabetically. "Evadne," Graham said quietly, a warning in his voice. "What?" "It's true. You spent 3 hours arranging screwdrivers and wrenches like they were library books. That's the kind of wild spontaneity I married." Helen laughed, clearly enjoying the way I was putting Graham in his place. "Evadne's always been too spirited for a quiet life. She needs someone who can match her energy." "Graham matches her just fine," Sylvia said, her voice cooling. "Perhaps the problem isn't with him." The implication hung in the air like smoke. I felt my cheeks flush with anger. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I think you know," Sylvia replied, meeting my gaze steadily. "Actually, I don't. Why don't you enlighten me?" "Sylvia," Paul said softly, trying to diffuse the situation, but she ignored him. "I mean that a good wife supports her husband, especially in front of family. She doesn't tear him down to build herself up." "A good wife?" I repeated, my voice rising. "What about a good husband? What about someone who actually pays attention to his wife, who shows some interest in her life, who makes her feel desired instead of just tolerated?" Graham's jaw tightened. "I've never just tolerated you." "Really? When's the last time you initiated anything? When's the last time you surprised me or did something spontaneous? When's the last time you made me feel like a woman instead of a roommate?" The silence that followed was deafening. Lila had stopped coloring entirely and was staring at her plate. Priscilla looked uncomfortable, while Helen seemed pleased with the drama unfolding. "Maybe," Graham said slowly, "the problem isn't that I don't try. Maybe the problem is that nothing I do is ever enough for you." "Oh, please," I scoffed. "Don't turn this around on me. I'm not asking for the moon here. I'm asking for a husband who acts like he actually wants to be married to me." "I do want to be married to you," Graham said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Do you? Because lately it feels like you're just going through the motions, like you're playing the part of a husband without actually feeling anything." Sylvia stood up abruptly. "I think we should go, Paul." "No, stay," I said, standing as well. "Let's get everything out in the open. You've never liked me, Sylvia. You think your son married down, don't you? You think he could have done better." "I think," Sylvia said carefully, "that my son deserves to be treated with respect in his own home." "Respect?" "Like the respect he showed me at our wedding when he acted like a sulky child because I made a few jokes." Graham's face went pale. You humiliated me in front of everyone we know. I was being funny. Everyone laughed. They laughed because they were embarrassed for me. There's a difference. Oh, grow up, Graham. If you can't handle a little teasing about your shortcomings, then maybe you're the problem. The words hung in the air like a slap. I saw Graham flinch as if I'd actually hit him. Paul's mouth fell open, while Sylvia looked like she wanted to throw her wine glass at me. That's enough, Graham said, his voice deadly quiet. But I was too angry to stop. Months of frustration and guilt over Stephen came pouring out, and I aimed it all at my husband. You want to know why I work late so often? Why I'd rather stay at the office than come home to this? Because at least there, people appreciate me. At least there, I feel alive. Evadne, Priscilla said softly. Maybe you should... No, I cut her off. I'm tired of pretending everything is fine. I'm tired of acting like this marriage is something it's not. Graham, you're a good man, but you're boring. You're safe and predictable and boring, and I'm suffocating. Graham stood slowly, his napkin falling to the floor. I see. The way he said it made my stomach drop. There was something final in those two words, something that made me realize I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Graham, No, he said, holding up a hand. You've made yourself very clear. He turned to his parents. I'm sorry you had to witness this. Lila, sweetheart, why don't you go watch TV in the living room? As his niece scurried away, Graham looked around the table at the wreckage of our dinner party. I think everyone should go home now. Graham, I said, panic creeping into my voice. I didn't mean... Yes, you did, he said simply, and that's the problem. After everyone left, the house felt enormous and empty. Graham had gone upstairs without another word, and I sat in the dining room surrounded by dirty plates and half-eaten food, wondering how things had gotten so out of hand. I'd wanted to hurt him, to make him feel as small and unimportant as he made me feel. But seeing the look on his face when I mentioned his shortcomings in front of his family made me realize I'd gone too far. When I finally went upstairs, Graham was in his study with the door closed. I could hear him on the phone, speaking in low tones. I pressed my ear to the door but couldn't make out the words. The next morning, he was gone before I woke up. He'd left a note saying he had an early meeting and would be working late, but something told me this wasn't about work. Something told me that everything was about to change. I met Priscilla at our usual cafe on Saturday morning, desperate for someone to understand my side of the story. The dinner disaster had been eating at me all week, and Graham's continued silence was making everything worse. He'd been polite but distant, speaking to me only when necessary, and spending most evenings in his study with the door closed. I don't know what's gotten into him, I said, stirring my latte with more force than necessary. He's acting like I committed some horrible crime. Priscilla nodded sympathetically, her blonde hair catching the morning sunlight streaming through the cafe windows. Men can be so sensitive about their egos. You were just being honest about your feelings. Exactly. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was trying to communicate. Isn't that what marriage counselors always say? That couples need to communicate? Of course, Priscilla agreed. And it's not like you said anything that wasn't true. Graham is pretty predictable. I felt a rush of gratitude for my sister's support. At least someone understood me. He's making me feel like the villain here. But what about my needs? What about what I want from this marriage? You have every right to want more, Priscilla said firmly. You're young and beautiful and full of life. You shouldn't have to settle for boring just because it's safe. I thought about Stephen, about the way he looked at me like I was the most fascinating woman in the world. We'd been texting more frequently since the dinner incident, and yesterday he'd suggested we meet for lunch. I'd said yes without hesitation. The thing is, I continued, lowering my voice, I've been spending time with someone from work. Just as friends, I added quickly when Priscilla raised an eyebrow. But he makes me feel appreciated. He listens to me and values my opinions. Oh, he makes me remember who I used to be. There's nothing wrong with having male friends, Priscilla said, though her tone suggested she suspected there was more to it. Graham should be grateful that other people can see what a catch you are. That's what I think, but instead, he's sulking around the house like I've betrayed him somehow, that all because I was honest about our problems. What I didn't tell Priscilla was that Stephen and I had done more than just talk. Yesterday's lunch had ended with another kiss in his car, and this time I hadn't pulled away. I'd kissed him back with months of pent-up frustration and longing, feeling more alive in those few minutes than I had in years of marriage. Maybe you should talk to Mom about this, Priscilla suggested. She's always thought Graham was too passive for you anyway. I don't know. Things are complicated enough without getting Mom involved. But even as I said it, I knew I would end up calling our mother. Helen had never been shy about sharing her opinions, and right now I needed someone to tell me I wasn't the villain in this story. As we walked out of the cafe, Priscilla linked her arm through mine. "Whatever happens, you know I'm on your side, right? You deserve to be happy, Evie. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for wanting more." Her words echoed in my head as I drove home. I did deserve to be happy. I deserved passion and excitement and a partner who appreciated me. If Graham couldn't give me those things, was it really my fault for finding them elsewhere? The house was empty when I arrived. Graham had said something about helping his father with yard work, which was typical. Even on weekends, he found ways to avoid spending time with me. I called my mother, needing to hear her voice and her unwavering support. "Darling," Helen said after I'd given her a condensed version of recent events, "I've been worried about this for months. You've seemed so unhappy whenever I talk to you." "I am unhappy, Mom. I feel like I'm disappearing in this marriage, like I'm becoming this boring suburban housewife who has nothing interesting to say." "That's because Graham doesn't challenge you intellectually. He doesn't stimulate your mind or your spirit. You need someone who can match your intelligence and your zest for life. But everyone keeps saying marriage is about compromise and working through problems. Maybe I should try harder." "Nonsense," Helen said firmly. "You've been trying for years. When does it become his turn to try? When does he start making an effort to be the husband you need?" Her validation felt like a warm blanket. This wasn't my fault. I'd been patient and accommodating for years, and what had it gotten me? A husband who treated me like a piece of furniture and a marriage that felt more like a business arrangement. "There's someone at work," I found myself admitting. "Someone who sees me for who I really am." "Oh, sweetheart," Helen said softly. "I was wondering when this would happen. You're too vibrant to stay trapped forever." "We haven't done anything wrong," I said quickly. "We're just friends. But he makes me feel alive again. There's nothing wrong with that. You're allowed to have connections with people who appreciate you. Graham should be worried about losing you, not sulking because you expressed your feelings." After we hung up, I felt justified in my actions. My own mother could see that Graham was wrong for me. My sister supported me completely. The problem wasn't with me. It was with a husband who'd stopped trying to make me happy. When Graham came home that evening, grass stains on his jeans and sweat on his shirt, I was ready to extend an olive branch. Maybe we could work things out if he was willing to make some changes. "How is your dad's yard?" I asked as he kicked off his work boots by the door. "Fine," he replied without looking at me. "I'm going to shower." "Graham, wait." I followed him toward the stairs. "I think we should talk about what happened at dinner." He paused, his hand on the banister. "What's there to talk about? You made your feelings very clear." I was frustrated. Maybe I said some things I shouldn't have, but the underlying issues are still real. We have problems, and ignoring them won't make them go away. Graham turned to face me, and I was surprised by what I saw in his eyes. It wasn't anger or hurt. It was something colder, more distant. "You're right," he said calmly. "We do have problems. I'm just not sure they're the problems you think they are." Before I could ask what he meant, he continued upstairs, leaving me standing in the hallway with a growing sense of unease. That night, as I lay in bed listening to Graham's steady breathing, I thought about Stephen's text from earlier. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. You're all I think about." Graham had stopped thinking about me years ago. Stephen couldn't get me out of his head. The choice seemed obvious, even if the timing was complicated. I was done feeling guilty for wanting more than Graham was willing to give. I was done being the villain in a story where I was actually the victim. It was time to start living for myself. The envelope was sitting on the kitchen counter when I came home from another extended lunch with Stephen. My name was written across the front in formal script, and the return address made my blood run cold. Patterson, Mills & Associates, Family Law. My hands shook as I tore it open, scanning the legal language that seemed to blur together. Words jumped out at me. Petition for dissolution of marriage, irreconcilable differences, division of assets, custody arrangements. Graham was divorcing me. I sank into a kitchen chair, the papers scattered across the table. This couldn't be happening. Yes, we'd been having problems, but divorce? I'd never seriously considered that Graham would actually leave me. He was too passive, too conflict-averse. He was the type of man who endured problems rather than confronting them. Apparently, I'd been wrong. The front door opened, and Graham walked in carrying his briefcase. He looked at me sitting at the table surrounded by legal documents, and his expression didn't change. "You got the papers," he said simply. "Graham, what is this? What are you doing?" He set his briefcase down and loosened his tie with the same methodical movements he'd performed every day for 8 years. "I'm ending our marriage, Evadne. I thought that was obvious." But we can work this out. Every couple goes through rough patches. We just need to try harder, maybe go to counseling. Counseling? Graham's laugh was bitter. You think a therapist is going to help you respect me? How you think talking to someone is going to make you stop humiliating me in public and cheating on me with your coworker? My mouth fell open. I'm not cheating. Stephen Halloran, Graham said calmly, pulling a manila folder from his briefcase. Accounts receivable at Morrison & Associates, divorced 2 years ago, lives in the Riverside Apartments on Oak Street, drives a blue Honda Accord, license plate number JKL 4829. He opened the folder and spread photographs across the table. Pictures of Stephen and me at the bar, pictures of us in the parking garage, pictures of us kissing in his car just yesterday afternoon. How did you? Private investigator, Graham said. Hired him 3 weeks ago when you started working late every night, but your pay stubs showed no overtime hours. I stared at the evidence of my affair spread out like an accusation. In the photos, Stephen and I looked intimate, guilty, exactly like what we were, two people betraying a marriage. This isn't what it looks like, I said weakly. Once Graham sat down across from me, and for the first time in months, he looked directly into my eyes. It's exactly what it looks like. You've been having an affair for weeks, maybe months. You've been lying to me, sneaking around, and making me look like a fool. Graham, please. Do you know what the worst part is? He continued as if I hadn't spoken. It's not even the cheating. It's the way you've been treating me. The constant criticism, the public humiliation, the complete lack of respect. You've made it clear that you think I'm inadequate in every possible way. Tears started streaming down my face. I never meant to hurt you. Yes, you did. His voice was steady, matter of fact. You meant to hurt me at our wedding when you mocked me in front of everyone we know. You meant to hurt me at dinner when you told my parents I wasn't man enough for you. You've been hurting me deliberately for months because it makes you feel powerful. That's not true? The investigator also found these, Graham said, pulling out printed screenshots of text messages. My text messages with Stephen, where I'd called Graham boring and passionless. Messages where I'd complained about his performance in bed. Messages where I'd said I was only staying married out of convenience. Seeing my own words in black and white made me realize how cruel I'd been. How had I become this person? When had I started taking pleasure in tearing down the man who'd loved me? I want you to know, Graham said quietly, that I tried to save this marriage. I really did. I thought maybe if I gave you space, if I didn't pressure you, you'd remember what we used to have together. We can still have that, I said desperately. I'll end things with Stephen. We can start over. Graham shook his head. No, we can't. Because you don't love me, Evaden. Maybe you never did. You love the idea of being married, the security and status it provides. But you don't love me. I do love you. You love Stephen, he said simply. The investigator has been following you for weeks. The way you look at him, the way you smile when you're with him, and that's how you used to look at me, a long time ago. I wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in my throat, because he was right. Somewhere along the way, I'd fallen out of love with my husband and in love with the excitement Stephen represented. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Graham gathered up the photographs and documents, sliding them back into his folder. Now we divide our assets and move on with our lives. I've already found an apartment. I'll be moving out this weekend. What about the house? We'll sell it and split the proceeds. My lawyer will contact you about the details. He stood up, straightening his tie with the same precision he brought to everything else. At the doorway, he paused and turned back to me. For what it's worth, Evaden, I hope Stephen makes you happy. I hope he gives you all the excitement and passion you've been looking for. You deserve to be with someone you can respect. After he left the room, I sat alone at the kitchen table, surrounded by the ruins of my marriage. The divorce papers seemed to mock me with their official language and legal terminology. This was really happening. Graham was really leaving me. I thought about calling Stephen, but what would I tell him? That I was getting divorced because of our affair? That my husband had hired a private investigator and had proof of everything we'd done together? Instead, I called Priscilla, sobbing into the phone as I tried to explain what had happened. Oh, Evie, she said softly. I'm so sorry. But maybe this is for the best. You haven't been happy for a long time. But I never wanted it to end like this. I never wanted to hurt him this badly. You can't control how other people react, Priscilla said. Graham chose to hire a private investigator instead of trying to work things out. That says something about him, too. But even as my sister tried to comfort me, I knew the truth. Graham had tried to work things out. He'd been patient and understanding while I'd grown more critical and cruel. He'd given me space while I'd used that space to betray him. I'd destroyed my marriage, and now I had to live with the consequences. The question was, what kind of life would I build from the wreckage? 6 months later, I sat in the family courthouse waiting for my name to be called. The divorce proceedings had been swift and efficient, just like everything else Graham did. He'd been fair about the asset division, asking for nothing more than his legal share. He'd been reasonable about everything, which somehow made me feel worse about the whole situation. Stephen had distanced himself once the divorce became public knowledge. Apparently, being the other man in a messy divorce wasn't as appealing as being the exciting distraction from a boring marriage. He'd transferred to a different department at work and avoided me in the hallways. So much for the great love affair I'd destroyed my marriage for. Morel versus Morel, the bailiff called. I walked into the courtroom on unsteady legs, my lawyer beside me. Graham was already seated at the plaintiff's table with his attorney, looking composed and professional in his best suit. He didn't look at me as I took my seat. Judge Martinez, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, reviewed the paperwork with efficient thoroughness. This is a petition for dissolution of marriage based on irreconcilable differences. Have both parties reviewed and agreed to the proposed settlement? Yes, Your Honor, both lawyers replied simultaneously. I listened as they discussed the division of our house, our savings, our retirement accounts. 8 years of marriage reduced to a series of financial transactions and legal obligations. The judge asked a few clarifying questions, signed several documents, and just like that, it was over. The marriage between Evadne and Graham Morrell is hereby dissolved, Judge Martinez announced. Both parties are free to remarry if they so choose. As we filed out of the courtroom, I caught up with Graham in the hallway. Graham, wait. He turned to face me, and I was struck by how different he looked. Not just physically, though he'd lost weight and seemed to carry himself with more confidence. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a sense of peace, of resolution. I wanted to say I'm sorry, I said, for everything, for the way I treated you, for the affair, for all of it. Graham nodded slowly. I know you are, and I forgive you. Do you think we could have made it work if I'd tried harder, if I'd been a better wife? He considered the question carefully, the way he considered everything. I don't think you were ever meant to be my wife, Evadne. I think we both settled for something that felt safe instead of waiting for something that felt right. But you loved me? I did, he agreed. But love isn't always enough. Sometimes two people can love each other and still be wrong for each other. I wanted to argue with him, to insist that we could have been happy if circumstances had been different. But looking at him now, calm, confident, free, I realized he was probably right. Ugh, what will you do now? I asked. I'm moving to Denver, he said. My company offered me a position managing their new sustainable energy division. It's a fresh start. That sounds exciting. Graham smiled, and it was genuine. It is. I'm looking forward to it. As he walked away, I stood in the courthouse hallway watching the man I'd married disappear from my life forever. I'd gotten what I thought I wanted, freedom from a boring marriage, the chance to find something more exciting. But standing there alone, I wondered if I'd given up something precious in my search for something better. 3 months later, I was sitting in my studio apartment, all I could afford after the house sold and debts were paid, scrolling through social media. A notification popped up. Graham had posted a photo from what looked like a hiking trail, mountains stretching out behind him. He was smiling, really smiling, in a way I hadn't seen in years. The caption read, "New city, new adventures, new life. Grateful for second chances." I stared at the photo for a long time, remembering the quiet man who used to ask about my day and make me chicken parmesan when I was stressed. The man I'd convinced myself wasn't enough, wasn't exciting enough, wasn't man enough. Maybe the problem hadn't been that Graham was too small. Maybe the problem was that I'd made myself too small to appreciate what I had. But it was too late for maybe. Graham had moved on, built a new life, found his happiness without me. And I was left with the consequences of my choices. Alone in a cramped apartment, working a job I hated, wondering if the excitement I'd craved had been worth the stability I'd lost. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to make Graham feel small, I'd made myself smaller. In mocking his quiet strength, I'd revealed my own weakness. In seeking something better, I'd lost something good. As I closed the app and looked around my empty apartment, I realized that sometimes the most devastating revenge isn't dramatic or cruel. Sometimes it's simply living well without the person who hurt you. Graham had gotten his revenge not through anger or retaliation, but through the quiet dignity of walking away and building something better. He'd shown me exactly what I'd lost by becoming someone who no longer needed me, and that was more devastating than any punishment he could have devised.